A new year to teams whose non-conference slate didn't go their way. Now is a chance to turn the page into the second part of this season. And non-conference play wrapped up on Saturday in a thrilling finish to the Big Sky Summit Challenge. Plus, the nation's leading scorer in the Mile High City continues to dazzle. This is the all-new Summit League Spotlight. Welcome into the Midco Sports Studios with Darron Wallace. I'm Kienan Dixon. Every week, we'll bring you the top stories, highlights, previews, and interviews with coaches and players from around the summit. And as the page turns on the calendar for some teams, it signifies a new season, a start to league play, and really diving into league play, Darron.
Yeah, it's been a long road to get here. Obviously, November and December, you play those non-conference games, you'll play your tune-up games, you'll play a few challenge games, at least some teams will, to try and test themselves and really see where they stand. But now we get into the nitty-gritty. This is where it all matters, and you really start to lay the framework for where you'll be in the postseason. And
you mentioned those challenge games. The Big Sky Summit Challenge Year 1 is complete, and it was a ton of fun. And hey, we have some hardware here. How about this, huh?
Yeah.
This is the Big Sky Summit Challenge Trophy. Nice. Summit League are the champions of it this year. Remember, it was 1.5 points for a road win and 1 point for a home win. The Summit League wins on point differential through all those games last week. What were your thoughts from the first Summit Big Sky Challenge?
Well, I will say it had to be a great success, right? I mean, that first night, what were there, 4 or 5 overtime games? I mean, it seemed like every single game came down to the wire. There was some really competitive games. There were a couple games that were maybe a little more lopsided. But I think in terms of just that competitiveness, you saw every team really bringing it in. And like I also mentioned, those overtime games are really special. We actually had a double overtime game in Northern Arizona. So, I mean, we'll dive into those a little bit later. But, I mean, I would have to say year 1 was a huge success.
Yeah, a ton of great competition. And one of those games that involved overtime was actually Tommy Bruner's side, the star for Denver, nationally right now as well. He's the leading scorer in the country with 25 points per game. He continued to do his thing in their 2 games last week. We'll hear from the star guard later in the show. But for right now, let's take a look at some of the top performances from that Big Sky Summit Challenge. Oral Roberts men traveled to Montana State on Wednesday. ORU wins 82-76. Transfer Jalen Bedford has done it all this season. He led all scorers with 23 points and 7 rebounds. His third 20-point game this season, Darron. He's averaging 14, and Isaac McBride, 19 and 5. This team is pretty good. They've played a tough non-conference, though.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is the result of what happens when you lose a player in Max Haismith, you lose a coach in Paul Mills, so you kind of spend the non-conference part of your season really trying to find yourselves again. This is a good program. This is a program that has built its way to where they are now. They've earned the reputation they have in the Summit League and nationally, and I think you're going to start to see here as we get into conference play that this team is going to start to figure out who they are. They might not wow you when you look at the win and loss column, but I think as you start to dive deeper into Summit League play, they'll start to get more comfortable, they'll start to gel, and then we'll start to see shades of those teams that have made NCAA tournament appearances and also NCAA tournament runs.
Absolutely, and then South Dakota State, Northern Colorado. I mean, you talked about that.
Yeah, the Northern Colorado game, it looked like Northern Colorado would run into ORU's crib and steal a win, but it wouldn't be the case, as you'll see. They led by as much as 9 in the second half in various points of the game, but ORU, they never quit. Ruthie Udomo, who's been a monster inside for the Golden Eagles, she's nearly averaging a double-double this year. She stuffed the stat sheet. She had 13 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists for ORU, who's normally a prolific three-point shooting team, but under Kelsey Music, but they only made 3 threes the entire game. They shot 3 for 22 from behind the three-point line. They scored 44 points in the paint, led by Jalea Oglesby off the bench. She shot 9 for 11 from the floor, finished with a team-high 18 points. But of course, the hero was the preseason first-team All-Summit League selection, Hannah Cooper, the game-winning layup with 3 seconds to go. Hannah Cemental would miss the game-winning three-point attempt on the other end for Northern Colorado. So ORU avoids an upset, and they stay perfect at home this season. Keenan, this is an ORU team that I'm sure a lot of people expected to be near the top of the standings on the women's side. They're doing that right now, and that win kind of encapsulates just how gritty they are when the shot's not falling.
Yeah, this is a dangerous team. We saw how they could score last year. Kelsey Music has that up-tempo style of offense, but I mean, when it comes down to it, they can win games when they need to. In the Mile High City, it was Denver against Idaho State last year. It was a thrilling finish in Pocatello. This year, same thing, just in Denver. And Denver trailed by 6 at the half. They came out in the second half. They shot over 60% from the field. They looked very good. And then Tommy Bruner does what Tommy Bruner does. He had 33 points in that game, including 2 crucial triples in overtime to beat the Bengals 95-82. Denver scored 18 points in the 5-minute extra frame, and Bruner, as we mentioned, remains the nation's leading scorer. He scored 22 or better in his last 6 games. 3 of those are 30-point showings.
Yeah, Tommy Bruner, he can do it all. He can score inside, he can score outside. You look at this Denver team, and over the past few years, they've kind of been middle of the pack, and you might have really thought of them as more of a defensive team led by Jeff Wilburn. But I think when you look at how they're playing this year, the addition of Jackson Brenchley has also been crucial for them. He's averaging 10 points a game, and that might not wow you, but I think when you look at the entire body of work from Denver, you have a Tommy Bruner who's averaging 25 a game, but you're getting contributions and steady contributions from 2 other guys. So I think you got to tip your hat to what Tommy Bruner is doing, but he's not doing it alone. I think the others are making it easier for him, and Tommy's taking advantage of the opportunities he's getting.
And you mentioned Jackson Brenchley, the 4-year transfer from Utah, playing in the Pac-12. Now he's moving to Denver. He has settled in well into this team as more of a distributor. He can also shoot. Toko Tynamo, I should mention that game, had 18 points and 9 rebounds. The Flying Finn, he's pretty special.
Yeah, he's really good. Denver is really good. They look great to start the season. But moving over to the women's side of the Summit League Big Sky Challenge, we had SDSU in Northern Arizona in an absolute thriller. SDSU trailed for most of this game, most of the second half, and they trailed by as much as 13 in the fourth with about 8 minutes and change left to go. But Paige Meyer and Brooklyn Meyer, they weren't going to have it. They wouldn't let the team go down easy. The Jacks started the fourth quarter, or rather, they went on a 10-0 run. After they found themselves trailing by 13, they cut it to an 84-81 game. Then after the Lumberjacks got a bucket, Paige Meyer and Madison Veloston scored 5 straight and tied the game at 86. Then at the end of regulation, trailing by 2, Paige Meyer ties the ball game with a layup with 4 seconds to go, didn't even use the glass. Then after both teams scored just 5 points in the first overtime, we went to a second overtime and the Jacks dominated, outscoring the Lumberjacks 17-9 in that second overtime frame. Paige Meyer, 37 big ones, most in program history in the Division I era. Brooklyn Meyer, 22 points, not too much of a slack herself.
I mean, you're getting 59 points from those 2 players by themselves. By the way, they're not related, just the same last name.
If there was any confusion.
Should mention that as well. Well, and then it was South Dakota and Idaho State in women's hoops. Grace Larkins, well, she's done it all. She did it last season for South Dakota, helping them to a solid season. She's done it again this year. 19 points with 11 rebounds, her 3rd double-double of the season. 73-47 Coyotes. And South Dakota, I mean, they look really good. They've won 7 of their last 9 against Division I opponents. Also, Tarrant, 12 different scorers in this game. That type of scoring offensive diversity, that should be something that is perhaps feared by the rest of the Summit.
Yeah, it wasn't something that we saw from South Dakota almost at all last year. All those injuries, it was just constant shifting of lineups. You know, this girl's hurt, that girl's hurt, this girl can play, that girl can't play. But I think this year you're seeing a much different type of South Dakota women's team. Obviously, Grace Larkins is the head of the snake, but I think the additions of Tori DePerry and Kendall Holmes have proven really fruitful for South Dakota early on. They've been really steady, really solid in that lineup. Kendall Holmes with the outside shooting and DePerry with kind of her inside presence and toughness on the offensive and defensive end. So I think when you mentioned that 12 different scorers in this game for South Dakota, that's what you can kind of expect, or rather, the style that you can expect them to play as Summit League play begins.
Yeah,
or rather continues, I should say.
Yeah, it's a dangerous team going into the rest of Summit League play, and I mean another team is South Dakota State.
Yeah, the South Dakota State men coming off a brutal loss to Weber State, and you know Zeke Mayo obviously has ties to Weber State with his good buddy Damian Lillard. But this is the kind of win that you felt like the Jackrabbits needed after dropping that tough one. 3 players shot perfect from the field. Will Kyle III, 9 for 9. Luke Appel, 5 for 5. And Matt Morris, 3 for 3 off the bench. He had 9 points, so that means he had 3 layups and 3 and ones. Then you get 19 points from Zeke Mayo on 5 made threes. The Jacks really could do no wrong in the game. They never trailed, and they shot 75% from the floor in the first half. And in a Summit League conference that, you know, on both sides, men and women, but particularly the men, it feels as open as it does. This could be the kind of a game that sends a message to the rest of the league because, you know, we talked about ORU earlier. They've kind of been the the kings of the men's side for the past few years. But I think South Dakota State, outside of, the 2021, Baylor Shimerman-led team, I think they kind of took arguably a step back last season. So now I think with that kind of a win over Montana State, you send a message like, hey, this is our conference. We own this thing.
Yeah, a dominant performance. And I mean, Frost is one of the toughest places to play in the country. Really, it is over the last decade. And they've defended it well. They've made that place a fortress. It's very difficult for Summit League teams to go in there and try and get a win. We saw it last year. Oral Roberts had to do everything they could to come out of there with a win. And Zeke Mayo just plays at an exceptional level there. All of a sudden, William Kyle III is playing at a different level as well. Dangerous squad. All right, let's take a look at the current Summit League standings after 1 week of league play. Of course, that was a couple weeks ago. On the men's side, St. Thomas is the only 2-0 team. They played 2 games, won both, and North Dakota State, rather they beat North Dakota and Kansas City. South Dakota State, the only other unbeaten after their lone win over North Dakota. Reigning champs Oral Roberts at 1-1 after dropping the opening game to Kansas City and beating Denver in overtime. I think the lesson here that we need to all take from this is we don't know anything.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the preseason standings and just look at how it's shaken out after the first weekend of conference play. I'm sure you're probably looking at it on both sides and saying, what's going on here? Yeah. I mean, you've got St. Thomas at top, which honestly, for some, I think a lot of people maybe expected this leap. You look at how they played Oral Roberts last year in the Summit League tournament semifinals. You were probably thinking, wow, St. Thomas is a team that can really play. They also showed it this year when they went to Marquette, nearly beat them at their place, could have beaten them at their place. But Johnny Towers got these guys rolling, and I would expect them to stay at the top of the conference on the men's side for at least a while as we begin this conference play.
And John Rothstein has his little one-liners. Well, for Johnny Tower, it's the professor, former psychology professor at St. Thomas, and he's got that thing humming over there in the Twin Cities. And on the women's side, Ruth Sin is doing the same thing as well. St. Thomas, ORU, and South Dakota State, as well as North Dakota State, all survived the first week without a blemish. And we mentioned Ruth Sin. They have St. Thomas playing like their men's counterparts. They're playing at a different level than they were last year. Oral Roberts and Kelsey Music in year 2 looks to be a dangerous squad, as we talked about. But can anybody knock off South Dakota State?
I would say that if there is a year to do it, this is the year. Not to say that South Dakota State's still not a good team. I mean, we just talked about that impressive win at the Lumberjacks in Northern Arizona. But I think that if there was a year that you were to say, well, South Dakota State, do they really have the ability to run away with the conference like they have? I mean, seemingly for the last, 3, 4, 5 years, I would say that this is the time. Oral Roberts, you look at, what Hannah Cooper has been able to do all season long and the expectations that she said that her team has come into the season with, and Ruthie Odoma, I mean, what she's been able to do on the inside for them. You look at that kind of a two-headed monster for them. And then St. Thomas, I mean, Ruth Sin I talked with her for a little bit last year at the Summit League tournament, and just the way she talks the game, the way she understands the game and encourages her players to really share the game with one another. I think you see that when they play. I think those are probably the two biggest threats, along with maybe a North Dakota State, who maybe people were a little bit lower on going into this season. They had a very impressive win at South Dakota to open up conference play. So there's a few teams that could really get in the mix and make things tricky for South Dakota State to really stay atop on the women's side.
And you mentioned Ruth Sin. I mean, she's coming from the Division III level as a coach. But this is a St. Thomas program on the women's side that was just as dominant as the men's side at the D3 level. Ruth Sin, a legend in the coaching circles as well. And then, of course, I mean, North Dakota State, always dangerous. They're always in the mix. Heaven Hamling, her experience. They have a good offense up there as well. All right, when we come back, a conversation with the nation's leading scorer on how he's getting it done.
Get ready, we're ballin'. You go right, I go left. Put in work, drippin' sweat, ain't even halftime yet. We're ballin'. Bounce 'em out the floor, let 'em check the score. Yeah, we get 'em, they ain't even know what hit 'em. We're ballin'. They wanna get like me. You better turn this thing up a couple 100 degrees. We're ballin'. I got glory in my bones, now don't let me into my zone.
From the first shot to the final buzzer. Don't miss a moment of the Summit League basketball season. Midco Sports Plus is the streaming home for all your Summit League teams. Subscribe today for exclusive content, expert team analysis, complete game coverage, and every single minute of Summit League action. Subscribe and watch at midcosportsplus.com.
The Ticket Smarter Peak Performers of the Week in men's and women's basketball have been named, and there are two players who are very familiar to this award: South Dakota State's Paige Meyer and Denver's Tommy Bruner. Meyer had 37 points in that comeback win over Northern Arizona and added double figures in the 61-53 win over Montana State to earn her second honor of the year and third of her career. Tommy Bruner earned his fourth of the year. With big performances last week, the senior scored 57 points over 2 games, helping Denver to an overtime win at home against Idaho State. I caught up with Bruner to talk about how he's been able to shine this season.
Bruner, 3. Tommy Bruner, pure.
You just gotta, you gotta get better each and every day. You can't really take steps backwards. If you're having success, it's fragile. So you really got to take care of it. So that's what I try to do. I try to get better, game after game, day after day. That's kind of my mentality, each and every day, and that's what I look forward to.
What is that feeling like when you just kind of know that you can't miss? Like, you kind of look at your hand, the LeBron James, like, I'm going to shoot this and it's going to go in.
First one in the corner, they left me.
Tommy pulls the trigger on a 3. No.
The second one was, shot clock was running down. They had 5 guys in the right position, so I just shot it over the top. And, you just got to trust the shot and pray it go in.
An 8-0 run, I honestly don't think we've seen one so far.
Tommy for 3 again. No.
There's something about college basketball, and you're playing through Thanksgiving, you're playing through Christmas, you're there. It's such a long season, right? And you found a way to kind of break that up. 800 Christmas gifts for kids in the local community. What was, the motivation behind that, and how were we able to execute that and get that done?
I'm just happy that it was a success, and if we could put a smile on one kid's face, that's enough for me. I was able to do it the right way, and do it in a big way, you know what I mean? So it was just happy to see those kids, get gifts for Christmas who may not have had the chance to get it.
Get ready, we're ballin'. You go right, I go left. Put it work, drip and sweat, ain't even halftime yet. We're ballin'. That's a mop the floor, let 'em check the score. Yeah, we get 'em, they ain't even know what hit 'em. We're ballin'. They wanna get like me. You better turn this thing up a couple 100 degrees. We're ballin'. I got glory in my bones, now don't let me into my zone.
From the first shot to the final buzzer, don't miss a moment of the Summit League basketball season. Midco Sports Plus is the streaming home for all your Summit League teams. Subscribe today for exclusive content, expert team analysis, complete game coverage, and every single minute of Summit League action. Subscribe and watch at midcosportsplus.com.
Well, it is all Summit League play from here until March Madness, with most games airing right here on Summit League Network. And here's the schedule. On the men's side, South Dakota State on the road at St. Thomas and Denver. South Dakota playing just once this week at Oral Roberts. ORU will also host St. Thomas in a rematch of the semifinal game from a year ago. North Dakota and North Dakota State will head to Omaha and Kansas City. And on the women's side, it's the exact same, just swapped home and road locations. And I think we'll learn a lot from the Oral Roberts-St. Thomas matchup on Saturday as we start to get into the thick of league play. And let's jump into some of those game previews for the men. South Dakota State on the road at St. Thomas Thursday. Darron, they lost there a year ago, and this could be an interesting matchup.
Yeah, I think we're going to see, it's kind of the new kids on the block in terms of maybe being potential perennial top dogs in the Summit League versus the guys who've been there. There's kind of a stoop kid afraid to lead the stoop almost, where you've got South Dakota State, who's been almost always at the top of the Summit League, and now they'll clash early on. I think it's a good test for both teams. I think if you're South Dakota State, you kind of get to gauge where you are after last year, where you were really the favorites, among the top 2 favorites to win the conference and win the conference tournament, and you don't do either of those things. You actually drop in the quarterfinals to North Dakota State, but then on the other side, the semifinals to North Dakota State, and then on the other side you got St. Thomas, who they made the semifinals and everyone was shocked. But then there was the question of, well, can they do it again? What do you got for us next year? And I think what you've seen this year is that not only are they back and just as good as they were a year ago, they're even better. Parker Bjorklund, I mean, you talk about his story and where he's come from and how he even ended up on the stage that he's at. I mean, just give him all the credit in the world and the way that he's been a leader both on and off the floor for them. And Johnny Tower, I mean, you call him the professor. There's no smarter basketball mind, I think, in this entire basketball conference. No disrespect to any of the other coaches, but I think when you talk the game with Johnny Tower and how the passion that he coaches with and just the mind he has, it's a perfect way for both teams to gauge where they're at early on in the season, get that matchup out of the way, and then whenever they meet again, I think it'll be an even better game than what I expect this first one to be.
And you mentioned Parker Bjorklund's story, a former intramural player. He was not playing on the team, walked onto the D3 squad, ended up, he's first team All-Summit preseason this year. All right, Coyotes at Oral Roberts on the men's side. South Dakota, they need to find some consistency. They lost 6 of their last 7.
Yeah, Caleb Stewart. I mean, it all comes down, it seems that it comes down to him and Boston Holt. What can these two provide? They have the ability to go for 30, but then they'll have games where they'll maybe only give you 7 or 8. And not to say that off nights don't happen or that they can't happen, but if you're South Dakota, where is that consistent scoring going to come from? Where is that night to night, do a job going to come from? This is a good South Dakota team. I was high on them coming into the year. I thought that they had the talent and enough consistency coming back from last year in terms of their roster turnover, where it's not going to be a bunch of a ragtag group. It's going to be, they had some transfers, but I thought it was going to work, and especially when you have a guy like a Max Burchell who's been there and he can kind of be more of a glue guy and a vocal leader for you. And Coach Peterson, after missing some time during last year, I think when you have a full season of him back at the helm, good things will happen. But I think that's what's been the issue for them, is where's that consistency going to come from as far as who's going to score the ball, who's going to have what role on a night-to-night basis. I think it might take them a couple more games in the Summit League to figure it out, because they did have not the worst non-conference performance, but I think they had some, again, those ebbs and flows, those ups and downs. In the Summit League, in Summit League conference play, I think it'll take them a little bit, but once they hit their stride, I think they can be a very dangerous team.
North Dakota at Omaha. I held off talking about my dog, Frankie Fiddler, till now, but he's quietly having a very good season, and now if the rest of that Omaha squad can just elevate to his level, I think they'll be in good shape. Yeah,
Frankie, we laugh and joke about how he views himself as a player, but I think that's what you need as an athlete, period, is that just supreme confidence. And the confidence that he's playing with, he's been lighting it up, scoring the ball seemingly wherever, however he wants. And like you said, I think it's up to the others on the team, no disrespect, but just the others on the team to rise to that occasion. Because when you have a guy like a Frankie Fiddler, that's a kind of team that can run through the Summit League tournament where it's just, one and done. Where if you have the best guy on the floor, you can go a long way. And I'm not going to say anything about them making a run in March Madness by any means.
It's a long way.
Right. But when you have a Frankie Fiddler, you can do a lot of things. A guy that can score inside and outside, do what he wants. Your team can go a long way. On the other side, for North Dakota, I think they need to figure out their identity as well. We talk about South Dakota finding their identity. I think North Dakota's kind of in that same boat where you've got a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things, but where does it all fit in? This is a very interesting early season matchup. Again, I think this weekend in particular on both sides, I think is going to be very telling, because you've got some of the top dogs already going at it, some of those teams that we kind of expected to be in the middle of the pack going at it. So this will be a very telling weekend for the Summit League.
And North Dakota with Tracy Eaglestaff and BJ Omot, a couple of guys who've been playing pretty well as well. All right, North Dakota State at Kansas City. The Roos, well, they might be a problem after that win over Oral Roberts on the opening night of league play.
Yeah, we we didn't really have much expectations. I mean, who knew what to expect from Kansas City? I mean, you had an abundance of injuries a year ago. You lose out on Raquandis Mitchell and so many other transfers. I mean, Shamari Allen, just all these guys, they leave your program. So a program that was or rather a team that was really built on the transfer portal a year ago has to do it all over again. So now this is an example of where you have a bunch of guys that haven't really played together, and you're kind of trying to bring them back in and figure it out. I will have to say, after that win they had against Oral Roberts, I think you got to take Kansas City very seriously. Obviously, it's a night-to-night league. Anything can happen on a Thursday or a Saturday. But I think just the confidence you get from beating a team like Oral Roberts, I mean, you can build on that in such a way where now you're looking at Kansas City and you're not looking at them as bottom feeders. You're looking at them as a team that can, kind of like St. Thomas, really shock a lot of people. So yeah, Kansas City, very dangerous team to look out for. But North Dakota State, I think they lost a lot. I don't think people really expected them to really fall off the way that they have. They're well coached. They play the right way. But I think, you lost an NBA talent in Grant Nelson, and that's no small thing to replace. I mean, Oral Roberts is kind of going through a similar thing where you lose a Max Asmus who's maybe not as surefire of NBA talent as Grant Nelson, but he's on the cusp. He's a very special player.
All-American.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think, again, you look at North Dakota State, it's a similar thing where, you're having to replace a lot. They graduated guys, they lose Grant Nelson, so where's that scoring going to come from? Where's the production going to come from? And they just need to figure that out. It's going to take them a minute. I'm not going to say that they're going to just ascend back to the top of the Summit League where they usually find themselves, but it's going to take them some time to find their footing.
And that's a team that's always in the Summit League championship game as well. So, great coach. Dave Richmond always finds a way to win. All right, on to the women's side. St. Thomas, they travel to Frost to play South Dakota State, and this is a game that St. Thomas needs to use as a measuring stick. Can they compete with the top level of this conference? They've played well recently, but this is a South Dakota State team that's firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, you usually find yourselves in these kind of matchups where you've got a new team that's having success, but they play the team that's always had that success, and then when they match up, it just seems like they can never really get over that hump. If St. Thomas can do it, I think this sends a message to the entire conference like, hey, we're not just some team that is making the jump to the Division I level and we're trying to see where we fit in. No, we're coming to the Summit League to dominate the Summit League. I think this is a huge test. I think it's going to be a great game. Again, I think on both sides you're going to have really, really awesome games. And this is one that I've got circled. I'll be very tuned in to see who comes out on top because I think really you're looking at two of the top three teams. I think you add Oral Roberts in the mix as well. Maybe South Dakota kind of after the way that they've started league play, they're kind of on that outside looking in at the top. But I think you've got two definite top three teams in St. Thomas and South Dakota State. That'll be a very fun game to watch.
It's going to be a ton of fun. In Vermillion, Oral Roberts at South Dakota. Same situation for ORU. South Dakota started to find their way, and this would be a big win for the Golden Eagles on the road.
Yeah, after dropping that first one in North Dakota State in conference play, I think South Dakota kind of had to look themselves in the mirror. Coach Kari has said, we're not going to feel sorry for ourselves. We don't have time to. This is a league where, basketball is a game rather where, every day is a new day, and you're not going to shoot 50, 60% every game. You're not going to shoot, and make 10 threes every game. You have to take it one play at a time, every minute, every second at a time, and that's kind of been the sentiment she's echoing. Again, like I mentioned earlier, this is a team that dealt with a ton of injuries last year, and you mentioned 12 players in the scorebook for them. They couldn't have even, that literally wasn't possible last year. I think throughout the entirety of Summit League play, they had only about 7 or 8 healthy players. Yeah. So now you're getting everyone some experience. You bring in the new additions of Kendall Holmes and Tori DePerry, and you've already got Grace Sarkins, who's one of, if not the best player in the Summit League. Like I said, I think they're kind of on that at that point where they're on the outside looking in at the top three, just based on how they started, with the loss at home against North Dakota State. But if they find their footing, I think Coach Karius can get that red machine going again with Oral Roberts, Kelsey Music. They got something special going on over there. After what they did last year, kind of turning around that program, now you're in year 2 of the Kelsey Music era led by Hannah Cooper and company. Again, this is another matchup that you'll really find out what these teams are made of.
I think we're learning any given Thursday or Saturday in the Summit is going to be a ton of fun, right? Omaha at North Dakota, two teams that are reeling, but with star players embedded in their rosters. Preseason Player of the Year Casey Borovich and the Fighting Hawks have lost 6 of 7, and Grace Cave and Omaha have dropped 5 straight. A textbook opportunity to get right.
Yeah, I mean, you look at North Dakota, and I think a lot of folks were higher on them than what they've shown. Now, Casey has missed some time this season. There's been a lot of, question marks and inconsistencies as far as roles for the North Dakota team. But I think when you have a Casey Borovich, you always have a chance. I mean, she's liable to go off for 30, 35 on any given night. That's just how good of a player that she is. You don't want them to become too reliant on her, the Fighting Hawks, in terms of what she's going to give you on a night-to-night basis. I think she can carry the load, but I think someone's going to step up. It's going to be who can step up when you need it the most, and that's what's going to be kind of the overarching theme of this North Dakota season. But on the other side, Omaha, I think you've got a team that, I mean, you can never really count them out. They always find a way to make a run in the Summit League tournament, no matter whether they're the 6th seed, the 2 seed, the 10 seed. They just seem to always be always be ready. They lost a lot, but I think when you've got the type of balanced talent that they have, I don't think they have a one superstar player, but I think when you have a team that just buys in and can believe in a system, it gets really tough to stop. So maybe not the team that's going to jump out the most at you on paper, but I think just with how well coached they are and how sound they are fundamentally, it could be interesting. So this is, again, 2 teams that maybe don't have that identity yet, but I especially look at North Dakota to really, if Casey can get going, you got to watch out.
It's a dangerous squad. Finally, Kansas City at North Dakota State, a rematch of last year's upset by the 10-seed Kansas City, the Cinderella in the Summit League tournament over 2nd-seeded North Dakota State. And that was a fun run. Deanna Jackson-Durrett had that team working. They only had 6 healthy players in that tournament, but Manna Mensah was the special one in there.
Yeah, I mean, in talking with them, the whole team had this sentiment of it doesn't matter whether you're 7-22 or 22-7. All that goes out the window, and the run that you saw them go on, Deanna Jackson-Durrett is a coach that really gets her players to buy in. I mean, just being around them, you get the feeling of, this is a team that believes. You weren't fooled. If you saw them before the tournament started, you weren't fooled by that run because you're like, man, this is a team that believes. Now, Manna Mensah, I mean, she went ballistic. She was making seemingly every shot they took. It's not exactly something you can count on, but I think this year you'll have a team that will be coming into the year with confidence because they make that run last year. Now you've got a team and a program that believes that, last year might have been a fluke to some, but we knew what we were capable of. So I expect Kansas City to be a very interesting team to watch, not just because of last year, but because of how they can build on that. And when you're led by a coach in Jackson-Durrett, who's talked the talk and walked the walk herself, I think it's easy for players to latch on to that. But North Dakota State, I kind of said it earlier, maybe we kind of slept on them a little bit too much. Heaven Hamling and Elle Evans, they're 2 of the most prolific three-point shooters in this conference. They've proved it so far this season, and I think that if there's a duo in this conference that you can say which duo can lead their team the most and lead them the farthest, I think you got to look at Heaven Hamling and Elle Evans and say, well, they got to be near the top. So 2 teams that are in a very interesting spot, and really the whole slate on the men's and women's side. We're going to learn a lot in this second weekend of conference play.
Yeah, this is going to be a ton of fun. I know, last point on Kansas City, we were in that practice the day before that first win to start the Summit League tournament. And Deanna Jackson-Durrett, I mean, the pump-up speech, I wanted to lace up the shoes and get out there.
Right.
That was,
Special stuff.
Point me to the nearest wall. Well, all games will air this weekend on Summit League Network. That's 16 of them, so make sure you subscribe. And, of course, get your tickets now for the Summit League tournament in Sioux Falls at summitleague.org/tickets. It's going to be a ton of fun with maybe some magic happening, maybe another Kansas City run. Omaha, who knows?
It's early.
It's wide open.
It's nothing like March. It's wide open on both sides. I'm really excited to see how conference play shakes out because I couldn't tell you. I feel like there's a team I think is the best, and maybe the team that I don't even think is good at all could end up winning the whole thing, so who knows?
Yeah, it's a ton of fun. Well, it starts here in January. He's Darron Wallace. I'm Kienan Dixon. This has been Summit League Spotlight. We'll see you next week.